and now that Eric Piment is part of their team, we're especially more endeared to the Ministry of Ratio Christi. So thank you all, and blessings tonight when you travel home.
Dr. Corey Miller is the president and CEO of Ratio Christi, an international campus ministry focusing on Christian apologetics and evangelism. Corey grew up in Utah as a seventh-generation Latter-day Saint before coming to Christ in 1988. He has served on pastoral staff at 4 churches and taught nearly 100 college courses in philosophy, theology, rhetoric, and comparative religions at notable places such as Purdue and Indiana Universities. He has written or co-authored 2 books on philosophy and 3 books on Mormonism. His 6th book, The Third Revolution, From the Campus to the Culture and a Vision Forward, is due out in 2025. He holds master's degrees in philosophy, biblical studies, and philosophy of religion and ethics. His PhD is in philosophical theology from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland. He is passionate about defending the truth of the gospel in winsome and bold ways. Please welcome Dr. Corey Miller to the platform.
Boom. Okay. As that video suggested, I contract with Harvest House next week. We're already in the process, but the third revolution, from the campus to the culture and a vision forward. So all my other ones were on Mormonism, giving back to the past, my experience there, idiosyncratic kind of a group focus. The others, academic, again, small group would read that. This is my first attempt at a pop level book that goes across the country, and it's the one I'm most excited about because we are living in transformative times. We are living literally in a revolution. And so I'm addressing what happened to America. How did we lose it? How did we lose the universities? And what can we do about it? If you remember watching The Lord of the Rings, you remember Galadriel, the elven princess, who said, "The world has changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it." Maybe you woke up one morning and you said, "What the bleep just happened to my country?" I'm not in Kansas anymore, Toto. This is not Grandma's America. And you would be right. This is not Grandma's America. This has become a different country. I've read all the primary literature on revolutions, from the Chinese and the Russian Revolution to the English, French, American revolutions, to try to gain a better grasp of what kind of a revolution we are in. We are in a revolution. It's a soft revolution. Not all revolutions come with tanks and guns, not initially anyway, but we are nonetheless in a revolution. This America, when we look at the political divide, a lot of people think it's just getting so bad between Democrats and Republicans, or liberals and conservatives. No, it's not really about those groups. It's really about traditional America versus a foreign invasive species that has emerged from the campuses and spread out into all the flora and fauna of our experience here. In 2019, October, I was invited by the author of A Manual for Creating Atheists. His name is Peter Boghossian. He does teaching essentially in opposition to what Ratio Christi does on campuses. Talks about faith as a psychiatric. It's a bit of psychosis. We don't want to be mean-spirited or berate Christians, and Dawkins, who endorsed his book, wasn't sure he could go along with that because Dawkins likes to berate Christians, or he did until he had buyer's remorse most recently. But he said that we need to treat them like psychiatric patients and reason with them through Socratic questions, hoping to bring them through reason to science, and eventually they would just become atheists. He and I were seeing things the same way. He invited me to lecture in his atheism 300 level seminar at Portland State University, where he eventually resigned, the home of Antifa there, because it's pretty dangerous for him being there. And of course, he prepared his students to try to take me down after a 2-hour lecture, so that was fun. And then we went to lunch after, and he proceeded to talk about how we need to have an alliance. I said, say more. He says, well, if your side doesn't get it together, and I said, whoa. And he said, not you, but I mean your side. Look, if you go, we go. If we go, you go. And he was talking about Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Michael Shermer and others. He said, you guys are pretty much already out. You need to stop talking about apologetics. No one wants to talk about talking snakes anymore anyway. We need to join forces because this is about civilization. I'm done with the atheism-theism debate. I'm going to dedicate the rest of my career to destroying social justice critical theory. Right at that time, we were in the process of printing the first piece. You see the booklets out there. Probably the first ministry in the country to get anything out substantially critical on critical theory from an evangelical standpoint, because we could smell it at the campuses. I was trained in Marxism. I was published in Marxist thought when I was at Purdue, and I saw what was coming early on. A month after that lecture, he puts this article up by the American Reformer, Welcome to Culture War 2.0, The Great Realignment, where he starts talking about how there are woke liberal atheists and woke conservative Christians on the one side of the aisle, and then classical liberal atheists and classical conservative Christians on the other. And he started discussing the possibilities that on this side of the aisle, we might have more in common in our worldview together than both of our opposites, our doppelgangers, as it were, on the other side. And he's absolutely right in so many ways. And so this realignment has begun to take shape. It explains why suddenly we can be politically voting with people like Elon Musk, with Joe Rogan, with Bill Maher possibly, Donald Trump. You start to find all these other people that conservative Christians wouldn't necessarily always be aligned with, but they're coming together because they see what's over there. See, when FDR and Churchill decided to align themselves with Stalin, it wasn't because he was a nice, conservative, virtuous Christian. It's because there was someone else worse in town, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And these neo-atheists who have taken 20 years to try to destroy Christianity in America and the West, were now seeing themselves as the targets of this new movement that had ascended to the top brass position. 3 months later, he and I started touring universities together, 4 universities in Utah, talking about the death of intellectual diversity in the universities. And we were being called logical fascists, being, pounced on by various woke groups on the campus. Liberal atheist, conservative Christian coming together, finding that we both had more in common in certain respects than, in my case, than certain even evangelical pastors, campus ministry leaders, Christian academic societies, some seminaries and so forth. We're finding that we had more in common in certain respects. The correspondence theory of truth, the idea that, I may disagree with what you say, but I would defend to the death your right to say it, Voltaire, versus Stalin. Ideas are more powerful than weapons. We don't allow our enemies to have weapons, so why should we let them have ideas? Illiberalism, cancel culturalism, Stalinism. See, who would have dreamed that we would be at a time like this, where we have a Supreme Court nominee that then gets confirmed when she couldn't or wouldn't answer the basic question, what is a woman? Or at a time like this where we've got just one state left until all 50 states now have laws against bestiality. When I was in Hawaii, they had just passed it a little while back because the Hawaiian legislators were saying that Hawaii is becoming an exotic destination for animals. Why would they have this in Leviticus, laws against this, unless it was being practiced? Why would we be putting up laws in this day and age unless it's being practiced? Look, in the 20s and 30s, Germany was the most educated country in the history of humanity, formally educated. And look what happened. Their pastors, the non-confessing pastors, baptized babies in swastika cloths. What about the 1920s and going forward in the 2020s and 2030s going forward here? What is it going to be like? At the conference, MNR 3 years ago in 2021, I was brought in to talk about critical race theory. And I remember bringing up this instead of a swastika. Right? I remember asking the group in front of me, how many of you want to be racist? Raise your hands. Anybody? Somebody? Bueller? How many want to be anti-racist? That group, this analog of that group in Chicago, half the room raised their hands. Now we know what that means to be an anti-racist, but back then we didn't. This is a different world right now in America. Bogosian 2 weeks ago tweeted, so many centrists and liberals have whispered the, quote, unthinkable, unquote, to me, they'll be voting for Trump. The great realignment. And yet you're having evangelicals, leaders, switching and voting on the other side. You've got this crisscrossing going on. It's like an eddy down a rapid. This tumult, bringing up all kinds of dirt, and you're not sure which way the water's going to go after that. We're in a revolution in this country. Culture. What is culture? Defined by the norms, values, practices, customs, beliefs, language, laws, and shared meanings. Do we have any sense of shared norms with respect to sexuality now? Pansexuality. It's becoming rampant. 331,000 members of the Reddit community there. What are our beliefs anymore? What is a woman? A man who can change from a woman to a man to a woman, black to white, white to black, different species even. This is a strange, brave new world that we've come into. Just to give you a survey across the land of what's going on, in 25 short years, in 1998, Americans that say that patriotism is very important was 70%. 2023, last year, 38%. No one wants to sing the song Proud to be an American. Some people hate America. They think it's always been evil. Others don't like what America has become, so they don't like it either. So anytime you're looking at a flag saying the Pledge of Allegiance or Proud to be an American, everyone's sketchy when you're singing that song. And you know you are. I am. Those that say religion is very important. 62% in 1998, down to 39% now. Well, that's politics and religion. Those are the two things you never want to talk about if you're going to save face with family and friends and influence people, right? Let's just talk about family. How about family? Those who say that raising children is very important, it ought to be a no-brainer. 60% 1998, half today. 30%. The entire Western world is having a demographic problem, a population demolition. But in America, 30% family. Well, what was deemed the last living virtue America, often associated with liberalism or liberals, a belief in tolerance, is at 58%, down from 80% just 5 years ago. Just 5 years ago. And a Yale study was taken from college students across the country, and the majority said that physical violence is justifiable to put down hate speech. And when they defined what hate speech was, it was pretty much anything that you're offended by. This is a different world, and this is 5 years, 25 years. What will the next 5 and 25 years be like if something doesn't change and change soon? So Gabe Lyons and David Kinnaman, in their fairly recent book, Good Faith, Being a Christian When Society Thinks That You Are Irrelevant and Extreme. 44% believe that people of faith are part of the problem and could hardly be part of the solution. Well, that's encouraging. 20% trust the clergy. They used to be the thoughtful people of society. Since 1636, the founding of Harvard, all the way up until 1880, 250 years, every college president in the country was also a member of the clergy and taught the senior class on moral philosophy. They were the brightest people in the community. But today, public perception has shifted from thoughtful pastors with a smart mind and a good heart to an empty mind, being irrelevant, have nothing to contribute, or to the pedophile priest. As one author said, looking at the average clergyman today, a lot of people would kind of see them like the smiling greeter at Walmart. That's not good, people. 40% of American adults think that proselytizing, sharing your faith, is extreme. Used to be if you blew up buildings, that was extreme. If you proselytize, 40% of American adults think it's extreme. But if you are a Christian proselytizing, it's now 60%. That's the world we're in right now. Good news is that 50% of adults still think that the church is relevant when we focus on food pantries and keeping kids off streets. But the moment you tell them why you're feeding the poor and keeping the kids off streets, now you're an extremist. So just shut up and give us your money. Shut up and give us your kids and your tuition when it comes to the universities. Someone mentioned this in the last talk I heard in here. According to the American Worldview Inventory from Arizona Christian University, a biblical worldview is characterized by 7 chief cornerstones. This should be no-brainers. A belief in God's existence and understanding of his nature. All humans are sinners in need of a Savior. Jesus is the only way. The Bible is God's word. Absolute truth exists, grounded in God. The purpose of life is to know, love, and serve God, and success is understood through faithful obedience to God. Not too controversial, seems common sense. But in 2022, only 6% of Americans hold a biblical worldview. A year later, it was down to 4%. This year's is not out yet for that number. But the good news is that 37% of pastors hold a biblical worldview. But that includes all kinds of pastors. When you have non-denominational evangelical pastors, that number now goes up to 51 to 57%. Yay! That is a travesty. That is scary. Those are the shepherds. Some of them are shepherds for sale. Others may not be shepherds for sale, or they don't know. But nonetheless, they're the ones that are supposed to be educating our parents to educate their kids to prepare them to go out into the world. And these are the senior pastors. It gets worse for the youth pastors and education pastors and so forth. Well, that's not good news, because then when you train them up in the way they should go and send them off to college, they get conscripted to work for the other side and become Bart Ehrman. Professors at age of retirement, around 60, liberal to conservative, the ratio is 12 to 1. What student can stand that when our focus is on skinny jeans and fog machines in the churches? Those guys are getting ready to retire. It gets worse. For those who are 40 and under and who have just achieved tenure and will be here with us for the next 30, 40 years, it's 23 to 1. And everybody wants their kid to get into the top schools, into the Ivy Leagues, into New England. It's 27 to 1 there. And so I often find, as I was in Hawaii last week and I gave this similar talk, parent comes up to me, happens every time. I am a product of what you talked about. We tried with our son, we sent him off to university, and we have now lost our son. And so parents say, well, gosh, if it's that bad, Harold, we need to make sure Johnny takes a religion class. No! No, that's the worst. I taught in that department. It's 70 to 1. And so with this great realignment, we're finding some strange things. You have Douglas Murray, who calls himself the gay atheist Christian, who will probably be voting Republican. Or you have Tom Holland here, who calls himself the agnostic Christian. He's a Roman historian, and here's what he said in his book Dominion, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World. That every human being possessed an equal dignity was not remotely self-evident a truth. The Romans would have laughed at it. The origins of this principle, as Nietzsche had so contemptuously pointed out, lay not in the French Revolution, nor in the Declaration of Independence, nor in the Enlightenment, but in the Bible. He recognizes where that notion of human dignity, the basis for equality, for all lives mattering, where it comes from. It can't be simply taken for granted. It's got to be embedded in a worldview. It has to be substantiated. Why should any lives whatsoever, other than my own, matter? Holland goes on in another article. The founding conviction of the Enlightenment, that it owed nothing to the faith into which the greatest figures had been born, increasingly came to seem to me unsustainable. Even as belief in God fades across the West, the countries that were once collectively known as Christendom continue to bear the stamp of that 2 millennia old revolution that Christianity represents. It is why we generally assume that every human life is of equal value. In my morals and ethics, I have learned to accept that I am not Greek or Roman at all, but thoroughly and proudly Christian. And yet he's still calling himself an agnostic Christian. Richard Dawkins, who recently has called himself a cultural Christian. I am a cultural Christian. And then Elon Musk now is calling himself a cultural Christian. In Dawkins' recent book, he calls this the divine spy camera theory. He says, I hate to admit it, but whether irrational or not, it does unfortunately seem plausible that if somebody sincerely believes God is watching his every move, he might be more likely to be good. They're having to admit that they like this cultural Christianity. They like the fruit. Richard Dawkins loves the apples. They're so juicy. He loves the apples, but he doesn't want the apple tree. He thinks he can continue to go to the supermarket and buy an endless supply of apples. And he's having a little bit of buyer's remorse that Christianity should stick around longer to function as a bulwark against something worse. Marxism over here and Islamism over here. I am a cultural Christian, is what so many are saying now. A couple of years ago, he sent out a tweet, and this gives you a sense of why he's feeling this way. He said, Rachel Dolezal, she went to an all-black college. She became the chapter president of the NAACP in her region. I think it may have been Chicago. And she got outed by her parents on social media who showed all of her baby pictures. She wasn't black after all. She was saying, I am black trapped in a white person's body. And he said, Rachel Dolezal, a white chapter president of NAACP, was vilified for identifying as black. Some men choose to identify as women, and some women choose to identify as men. You will be vilified if you deny that they literally are what they identify as. Discuss. She went through the whole bachelor's degree, fooled everyone, got in leadership positions, and when she was caught, she just doubled down and still kept with the narrative. And she wasn't alone, there were others too. And this dysphoria happens not only in transgenderism or transracialism, but in transableism, transspeciesism, and a whole host of other trans things where I self-identify with however I want and you're expected to believe it. Well, what happened to Dawkins? The American Humanist Association took away his Humanist of the Year award that they had given him 25 years before. And so Peter Boghossian joked with me and said, I told Richard, if you're not careful, you're going to be only allowed to speak at Ratio Christi chapters because they're the only ones that would have you. Friedrich Nietzsche, born in 1844, I remember the date because that's when Joseph Smith died. A madman who arose early, and a little bit of background on this. He wrote this book, The Gay Science. Published it approximately at the time he was going into the insane asylum for the last 20 years of his life as a nihilist. So a poem in The Gay Science is The Madman. A madman who arose early in the morning with lantern in hand, shouting, "Where is God?" But because no one in the town square believed, they laughed and jeered. Is God lost? Is God hiding? Then one said, "We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. Is there any up or down, left or right? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? God is dead and we have killed him. How shall we, the murderers of all murderers, comfort ourselves?" In other words, he was alert to the fact that if we kill God, what comes next? Boghossian knew that he and Dawkins and others talked among themselves. They knew that if they tried to destroy God in the West, some other god or gods would emerge in its place, but they never realized how bad it would become. Nietzsche, sometimes quoted as one of the founders of postmodernism. He's not, but the seedbeds were there even for critical theory. If God is dead, everything is permissible, Dostoevsky, the Russian philosopher, said. Well, what explains this massive cultural shift, this revolution that we're experiencing right now? You simply have to ask the prior question, what is the number one institution upstream shaping culture downstream? And the answer is the university. The university, the most influential institution in civilization. As goes the university, so goes the culture. As goes the U.S. university, so goes the world. At Purdue University, where our headquarters is virtually across the street from, 51,000 students on the main campus, 100,000 statewide. But on the main campus, we have probably the third largest number of international students of any public university in the country, mostly from China, India, and South Korea. 1/3 to 1/4 of all presidents or prime ministers across the world did a degree, an academic degree, from a U.S. university. All roads lead to Rome, you've heard it said. Rome is the American university. It is the most strategic place for ministry, because out of it come our doctors and lawyers, our media, our government, our business leaders, our K through 12 educators, and future professors. As go the universities, so goes the culture. As goes the U.S. universities, so goes the world. Charles Malik, UN Secretary General, senior articulator of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, himself a trained philosopher from Harvard, a Christian, said, you want to change the culture? Change the university. Well, what about these universities? We founded these universities. What is going on here? Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, all pre-1776. Yes, Harvard, the two books show upward mobility, human reason, and the other one looking downward, the limits of human reason, the need for revelation. Freshmen were required to take Hebrew. The motto at Harvard was not just veritas, capital V or capital T, truth. It was founded by the Puritans just decades after they landed. All truth is God's truth, but within a decade or two after that, they changed it and it remained the same for almost 300 years. I've been on all of the colonial school campuses. You won't find this on its website, but I found it all over the etchings of the ancient buildings there. Veritas, Christo et Ecclesiae, truth for Christ and the church. That's the motto that's still etched into their buildings. As of 2019, the year that I was with Peter Boghossian, we began our alliance. Harvard student body became the first time ever majority atheist and agnostic, and shortly thereafter hired an atheist chaplain to lead all of the other chaplains. And they have a seminar called What in the Butt. You can just think about what goes on there. Well, many people at Yale, some professors from Harvard, some innovative businessmen realized Harvard was drifting left, mission drift. And so they set out to up the ante, lux et veritas, light and truth, where light symbolizes salvation in the Hebrew scriptures. And you can walk into Yale and the archway says, for God, for country, and for Yale. But today, Yale has the reputation now for rejecting a $20 million grant, the highest ever, from a donor, sending it back to the donor. Why? Because the donor had a string attached. He wanted Western civilization taught. Hi-ho, Western civ has got to go. Hi-ho, Western civ has got to go. From Stanford to Yale, they gave $20 million back. And Yale has been doing Sex Week every year for the last 8 or so and has spread to at least 24 other campuses. Well, its child prodigy was Jonathan Edwards, America's great theologian, who impacted Whitefield, who was responsible for revivals. Well, he was at Princeton. Awesome. And Princeton, there we have De sub numine viget, under God she flourishes. And it has the Old and New Testament up on top. And today you have the infamous or famous moral philosopher, the most famous one, Peter Boghossian, a Marxist, atheist Jew who embraces not only infanticide, but also sex with animals, so long as it's mutually consensual and there's no harm inflicted on the animal. And then you got Columbia University, where Obama graduated from. And its motto was quoting Psalm 36:9, by thy light we shall see light. And now we just lock up janitors during a Hamas takeover. Things have changed, and few who are now around remember it. We lost the universities for a variety of reasons. Epictetus, the Greek philosopher, said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so that we listen more. So let us listen now. Practically speaking, America was growing these sectarian schools. This is a Presbyterian school. This is a Congregational school. That's a Baptist one. That's a Methodist one. Brown, Presbyterian. You know, I mean, Brown was Baptist. Presbyterian was Princeton was Presbyterian Reformed and so forth. Well, they couldn't afford to do that anymore. People wanted to take business and engineering and other things, and so they became secular, not secular humanists, just non-sectarian at the time. Very practical, service-based. But we had no graduate schools in America. And so our brightest people would go on over the pond to Europe, mostly over to Germany. And one wants to ask, has anything since the Reformation good happened out of Germany? Out of that comes the culminator of the Enlightenment, Immanuel Kant, the father of agnosticism. You can't know ultimate reality, right? And from him comes Schleiermacher, the father of modern liberal theology and biblical criticism, and all other kinds of things were happening then. They would come back to the U.S. and the battle was on. The battle was on for the top brass positions as professors, as deans, as administrators, as presidents. And the first ideological revolution it worketh not. You want to push the page for me? One more. There we go. There have been 3 major revolutions in the universities. Scientific naturalism was the first one from 1880 to 1930. Note, Harvard started in 1636. It's 250 years. Up till 1840, every president was also a member of the clergy. Up to 1880, church and chapel attendance were required at every school. For 50 years, the battle was on, and we lost. We got pushed out, and we had to go start our new universities. Calvin College, Wheaton, Biola University, and so forth. A tactical retreat. Something maybe a person like Rod Dreher, Live Not by Lies, a manual for Christian dissidents, I say a manual for defeatist Christian dissidents. We do a tactical retreat and start all over again, being 250, 300 years behind. We lost. We started our new schools. We privatized. We insulated ourselves. We abdicated our role and responsibility in high culture, and we've now paid an exorbitant price for that move. Something else was happening in 1930, though. As the dust was settling in America, something was happening over in Europe, in Germany. There was a battle between the socialists, the globalist socialists or international socialists, and the national socialists. For the globalist socialists, most of those founders, they were now new, trying to figure it out. How come Marx's predictions did not come to pass? They were neo-Marxists. They embedded it in Frankfurt, Germany, the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, it was called. Anytime you hear that expression, critical theory, critical race theory, critical gender theory, critical queer theory, critical pedagogy, critical anything, if it's not critical thinking, it's Marxism applied to whatever the other term is added there. It comes from Germany, once again. Down south, the other Axis power was Antonio Gramsci, imprisoned. He wrote the prison notes. Those prison notes found their way mediated into the West, into the English West, by a Notre Dame professor of literature, a Marxist, who was the first international president of the Gramsci Society, Joseph Buttigieg, Mayor Pete's dad. And to the west of the Axis powers, the Axis Marxist powers, because it was a bad place to be if you're Jewish, which most of the founders of that critical theory school were, and you're a globalist socialist. Remember, Stalin and Hitler were not good buddies. Both socialists, but one was Antifa and the other was fascist, right? They had to get out of there, and they came over and they embedded in Columbia University, in Brandeis, in UCLA, and other places. About 15, 20 years later, after the Nazis emerged to power in 1933, there was this new movement in France called postmodernism, with Jacques Derrida, Francois Lyotard, Foucault, who is without doubt the most cited scholar ever on Google Scholar, without any question. They were the fathers of postmodernism. And when you think about postmodernism, you think relativism, you think suspicion of authority, you think dogging meta-narratives and so forth. And if they're so skeptical, you would think that every one of their members would run the gambit from liberal to conservative, left to right on the political spectrum. You don't. Every one of them to the man, from the first and second generation leaders, were all hard left. They're called the new left. They were all members of the French Communist Party or sympathizers. And they all came over and taught at American schools as well. And so you had in this second revolution this amalgam of postmodern cultural Marxism. As though Jordan Peterson's not far off when he calls it that, because they were kind of two different movements, but they were kind of one. And it's naturalism all the way down, but its later iteration became cultural Marxism, critical theory, and then it became postmodern cultural Marxism, critical theory. Naturalism all the way down. That's what happened. They came over to the US, pumped out books and pamphlets, and someone like Marcuse became the faculty advisor, as it were, of the 1968 student protests and sexual revolution. And when he was in Europe meeting with, I think, the Viet Cong leaders in 1968, the revolutions were happening in the major cities, and they would hold up signs, Marx, Mao, and Marcuse, Marx, Mao, and Marcuse, Marx, Mao, and Marcuse. 70s, they were bombing, they were getting violent in America. American public wasn't having it. So they decided, you know what? As one of Antonio Gramsci's German disciples had it, Rudi Dutschke, he said, we need to go back and think about the long march through the institutions. See, what Gramsci helped us to see is that the reason why the West was not capable of a frontal assault, a revolution that happened in China and Russia, was because the West was like a castle with a moat, and it kept regenerating itself every time you had lobbed shells over. There was a civil society and a political society. The political society is military, government, law enforcement. And you can't go there. In the West, you need to go to the soft tissue of culture, a soft revolution. And that is academia, media, and ecclesia. And once you ensconce yourself sufficiently in those soft tissues of that culture, then can come a time for the war of movement, for the frontal assault. We are in position for that now. And so what you're seeing is an entire takeover of a political party and an infiltration into the rest, including evangelical churches, campus ministries, Christian academic societies, and seminaries. The barbarians are no longer at the gates, they're in the citadels. And the great realignment has come now, and we're finding ourselves somehow friends with Richard Dawkins. Number 3, the third revolution. Well, I'll put you in suspense for a moment. Let's go next one. Barna wrote a report, Reviving Evangelism. And in that, it was a new vision for evangelism. The question was asked, what most increases your interest in Christianity? And non-believers answered, and they had 13 options to choose from. And almost half of them, 44%, chose the same one, better evidence to support it. And when they asked not theoretical Christians, but practicing Christians, what they thought non-believers would say, they picked that answer dead last, which is to say that the church is woefully out of touch with where the non-believing world is at. One more, please. And so Barna concludes, look, it's clear non-Christians want credible, reasonable explanations of the Christian faith. But sadly, remember, there's evidence, there's data and evidence, and then there's interpretation and explanation. Great data, great evidence, crappy explanation. Barna concludes they unfortunately misinterpret the clear data because of a widely held misunderstanding of the role and value of apologetics. And here's what they say. This does not necessarily mean Christians should invest heavily in traditional apologetics, however, as demonstrated by non-Christians' distaste for street preaching and tracts. Depersonalized outreach that feels intrusive or manipulative is likely to lower openness to the gospel. That's what they think apologetics is. That's our own sociologists. Great. But the reality is, what is still a command in Scripture, be prepared to give an answer, is now back in demand in culture like never before in American history. See, the problem is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so that we listen more. We have not diagnosed our culture properly. We lost the millennials because we thought we were going to the synagogues. You know, in the book of Acts, Paul went to the synagogues to prove to them that Jesus is the Messiah from the Scriptures. But when he went to the Greeks, he put the Scripture behind him. He knew something about their worldview, and he talked about an unknown God, right? We have been thinking we're in Acts 2 for an entire generation or more. We're not. We've been in Acts 17 for a long time now. That's our culture. Even our own church pastors no longer hold a biblical worldview. We are in revolution in this country. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and we better act and act quick. Third revolution, go back. Us, now. Title of my book, The Third Revolution, From the Campus to the Culture and a Vision Forward. We must give an answer in culturally relevant ways. Alliteration, parachurches, pastors, parents, professors, philanthropists, political allies, and prayers. All hands on deck. It's the university, stupid. Everybody needs to give a tithe, mentally a tithe. Pay attention what's coming out of the universities. Even if you're not called to go into the universities, you need to prepare for what's coming out of it. You need to prepare your family. You need to prepare your congregation. You need to prepare your neighbors. It's like Seneca once said that, you may not take an interest in politics, but politics will take an interest in you. You cannot escape this. We're all not Rod Dreher, who can move over to Hungary and pursue dual citizenship as a tactical retreat. No, we need to take a stand now. Where else are we going to go? And so the Christian response is the third revolution. And to talk about parachurch, Ratio Christi as an example, I mention a lot of different parachurches in the book, but thoughtful Christianity, transforming lives on campus today, changing culture tomorrow. See, there's more to it. The title of my talk is Transforming Lives, Institutions, and Civilization. See, Chuck Colson used to say, change lives, change cultures. Not quite. University of Virginia sociologist, Christian, James Davison Hunter, in his book, To Change the World, he says that revolutions can often appeal to the populace, to the masses, but it never, ever, ever, ever takes off until it is baptized by the elite. Institutional recapture matters. We abdicated our role and responsibility in high culture 100 or so years ago. We watched 100 years of a new king in town, and the new atheist took advantage of the 9/11 scare and began like a French Revolution with Robespierre, the Richard Dawkins being the Robespierre, creating the guillotine, and then he got guillotined himself. And now they're all worried because they're all being pushed out, and the new guard is coming in through DEI, or what I would call DIE programs, into the corporate world, into the education sector, into the media, and even into the evangelical churches. A global movement equipping students and faculty with historical, philosophical, and scientific reasons for following Jesus. We need to show that Christianity is plausible, that it's reasonable, that it's true, and that it's good for the world. It might not be good to the world, but it's good for the world, and we have objective reasons for thinking so, and I've written a booklet out there on that. Ratio Christi's arsenal for a parachurch as an example. RC Prof, we have a professor ministry, but we also are now starting to fund PhD students who are top brass and get into top 100 schools and help them to launch PhD student-only chapters. This is the long march through the institutions. We need to have a battle plan that is long-term. RC University, our standard bread and butter, student ministry, college prep, high schools that train them how not just to survive, but to thrive in university, international. And then the press, those booklets, those booklets out there, almost all written by PhDs, so they're expertly written. They are palatable, 25 pages, and they are accessible. We force the authors to go down to the 11th grade reading level. Being translated into Spanish, they're digital, they're printable, and that's just an example of what we're doing. What about, go ahead and push to the next one, please. Pastors, clergy. Look, pastoring is hard. I've done it. You're asked to do a lot, and you're really trying to serve a bell curve, and you can't do everything. But we have gone from cultural thought leaders and shepherds to now shepherds for sale and to faddish gimmicks like skinny jeans and fog machines. You wonder why we're viewed as Walmart smiling greeters, as irrelevant in the mind and pedophile priests at worst. We need to get back to Ephesians 4:11 and 12, equipping God's people for works of service. Loving God with our mind, as Jesus sort of commanded, being able to refute false doctrine. This is where our world is at. We are Greek. We are in a post-Christian era, And it's not just a neutral, it is a hostile one. Parents, grandparents, train them up in the way they should go, and when they get older, they get conscripted to work for the other side. If we do not train them, you literally are paying for the apostasy of your own children. That's how it's going. That's what's happening. It's hard. Parenting is hard. I am one. We've done things as a culture to mean that both spouses have to work. If there are two spouses, there aren't even two spouses for many marriages. But if there are, maybe because of our lifestyle, maybe because we've elected officials that have created massive inflation and now we feel like we have no other choice, but it doesn't matter. You're exhausted when you get home. It is tough. You have a job to do. And that is not to give your kids to the youth pastor whose biblical worldview is worse off than the senior pastor. We need to sustain the family or abolish the family, the title of a new book by a Marxist professor at University of Pennsylvania. They're going for your family. Philanthropists, donors, stop funding those who hate you. A guy by the name of Griffin, so sick of the leftism up in Chicago and Illinois. He was a conservative. He moved down here to Florida. But a year and a half ago, he gave $300 million to Harvard. Biggest single donation ever. How could a billionaire manage his money that well and not think to do his homework about what's going on at the universities? And now guess who's teaching at Harvard? His old mayor, Mary Lori Lightfoot. Give to God's kingdom, churches, and strategic ministries. Stop funding those who hate. But my alma mater, forget your alma mater. It's taking our children. Professors, educators. Abraham Lincoln said that the philosophy in the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. Hitler was alleged to have said, give me the textbooks and I will control Germany, and he did. Whoever controls the education controls the rest. Politics is downstream from culture. Sometimes politics shapes culture. It's a teacher. But those are downstream from education, and the apex of education is the university. And that's why we've provided RC Press with these booklet series dealing with everything from classical apologetics on the problem of science and suffering and scripture to now cultural apologetics, race, class, sex, gender, ethnicity, and so forth. Expertly written, 25 pages, 11th grade reading level. Good for your small groups, good for your family, good for your youth groups. I should have put political allies there. That's a reality. And I'm thinking allies from Peter Boghossian on the one hand to Elon Musk, who saves freedom with X, with Twitter on the other hand, to Alliance Defending Freedom. You know, we have a theology of litigation. Since I've been president 9 years, we've had 130 legal inquiries, 4 federal victories, 5 appellate court victories, 2 SCOTUS assists, and right now we're in litigation with the Biden administration's Department of Education. I met with a senator of Indiana last week, actually 2 of them, and one of them crafted a law. He was influenced by Floridian law and Texan law that were a bit too radical and got caught up in the courts, but it's a tenure bill that got signed into law, and now the professors in Indiana are freaking out because they're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not a Supreme Court justice, a lifetime appointment. I actually have to be able to show some kind of viewpoint diversity to get and to maintain tenure. I'm gonna put this in my book, and I'm hoping legislators, I was with another legislator co-speaking in Hawaii 2 weeks ago, state senators will read this stuff. I'm hoping they'll see what Florida and Indiana and Texas are trying to do in blue states. And again, it's not Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative. It's Marxism and historic traditional America. I'm hoping that blue states who have some, red states who have some common sense will start to do this in the universities, while we, someone like Ratio Christi, is marching through the long march, pumping PhDs in to launch PhD student-only chapters. And then there's prayers, personal, corporate, revival, almost every major revival, from the Reformation to the New England revivals and so forth, to the recent one at Asbury, they are connected to, either launched from or connected to, a college campus. The university is the most influential institution shaping civilization. As go the university, so goes the culture. As goes the U.S. university, so goes the world. So I say join the revolution or support the revolution. Last week, University of Hawaii at Manoa, through a talk like this, we launched a chapter, and I'm hoping the University of North Florida, as of this one, get on board, join our Ratio Christi staff here. We need help on our campuses. We need support for the missionaries. We need volunteers. We need to take these campuses. We're on 100 universities. There are 4,000. We need to be on 3,900 yesterday. Open up to questions. Yes. Yeah. How do we deal with the wokeism in our country that's everywhere, lots of tension? Well, again, we're hearing saber rattling happening. Look around and look at the stained glass windows. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. In 1989, the Tiananmen Square incident happened. In 1989, critical race theory was launched by its own proponents' admission in a stained glass windowed church in Wisconsin. They laugh about how they were Marxists who did that. The saber rattling is not just at the gates, they're in the citadel. And that's why I have a better ally in Elon Musk and Peter Boghossian in certain respects. It's temporary. Look, FDR and Churchill, when they partnered with Stalin, it wasn't because he was going to be a great, virtuous, a Christian guy who's going to be in their wedding line. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. We got to deal with something worse than us right now, and we'll go back to Cold War later. But right now, it's about civilization. That was Peter Boghossian's point for a partnership. These allies make strange bedfellows, but you have to ally with people who you normally probably wouldn't if the threat is so severe, and the threat is so severe. There are many pastors that I consider maybe saved, happy to be with them in eternity, but they're conscripted and they're working for the other side. They're baptizing babies, not with the swastika, but with this. And yet non-Christians, I can find them that are willing to fight for a platform that would be more conducive to a Christian expression of faith. Debate is not hate. Let's debate. But you can't do that when you're pushed with Stalinism and illiberalism. And so anyone who is an atheist even, that's a classical liberal that believes in that kind of freedom, I can partner with on a temporary alliance basis. No one's got the best answers. We're in revolution. It's in our churches as well. Sure, I mean, we'll take any volunteers, anyone wanting to join the militia. We're looking at the greatest wealth transfer in the history of America right now, too. If we can capture the wealth and get the funding properly channeled, let's do that. Anybody, if you are able-bodied, pick up arms and let's go. We need to do institutional recapture. transforming lives, institutions, and civilization. You cannot avoid the need for institutional recapture, and it's not going to be easy. And the solution is not, let's start all over again and now be 400 years behind. I think we're at an end. Oh, go for it.
One of the terms that's been used a lot in criticism of Christian activism has been the term Christian nationalism. And so, is recapturing institutions the same as Christian nationalism? And can you just
It's a good question.
talk about that popular term and how the proposal of introducing Christian worldview relates to it?
Yeah, the opposition uses the term as a danger term, like they like to call everyone Nazi or fascist. They call them fascists because they are anti-fascists, Antifa. They're Marxists. They're globalists, and that's why they don't like borders. They like open borders, the spread of communism. I would rather have nationalism than borderlessness and be governed from without. Nationalism can be both bad or good. It depends on what you're doing with it. It's like a home. We don't lock our doors at night because we hate those outside. We lock our doors at night because we love those inside. At the DNC last night, they kept a Venezuelan out because he didn't have ID. Why? The White House has fences around it. Why? Nationalism isn't per se bad. It can be bad, and I would rather have Christian nationalism than secular nationalism. What it doesn't mean is this effort to go take over in some theocratic way. That's what is being pushed on us as what it means is a theocracy. That's not what hardly anyone is really saying. We're saying we want a serious seat at the table. We want to reclaim the intellectual voice of Christ and have the ability to compete in our own institutions that we founded.
Historically, Christianity and mixing Christianity or tying it in any way to politics has been mixed at best, as you know. How do you suggest we walk the line in doing the things that we believe we need to do, wherever we live in the political spectrum? As you said, there's a spectrum and sort of a double spectrum there. But how do we walk the line in doing that without tying Christ to particular points of view? And I say that in the DC area, one of the common criticisms I've heard of Christianity was, I can't be a Christian, I hate the Republicans. And which you laugh. But anyways, even though Christians,
Right.
I feel responsible for protecting that idea in these people who they aren't extremists, they're maybe on the liberal side, but they say, I can't be Christian because I don't like the Republicans, because it's so tightly tied in their mind.
Yeah, again, you're never going to please everyone. They're going to try to put you in a box. The current Republican platform, if you look at it today, it doesn't have anything to do with abortion, homosexuality. Those are excised now, right? The 1994 Democratic platform looks a lot like today's 2024 Republican platform. It even had something to do with a balanced budget, and everybody, up until Obama's second year in the Democratic Party, believed that marriage was between a man and a woman. Today's Republican platform seems to be a broad tent that includes all of the 20th century Republicans and Democrats composite, whereas a lot of the Democratic Party has been hijacked by Marxists. It's almost like, so that we don't say that we're putting our hope in a political party or identifying Jesus as a political party. If you look in the book of Kings, in the northern kingdom, 100% of their kings were evil. The southern kingdom, exactly 50% were evil, 50% were good. I kind of see the Republicans that way, and the Democrats that way. The reason why I don't want to identify as a Christian and a Republican I want to say that the Republican Party seems to be the one that allows Christians a seat at the table, to be salt and light. It is not a Christian party, and it can be hostile toward Christians, and it can manipulate and enslave Christians. But it is the only one right now that really gives a serious opportunity for us to go in and be salt and light. And right there is an opportunity for institutional recapture as well. And that doesn't mean that we dominate it and it becomes our political party. I want to think back about Martin Luther King too, when they asked him, can you, what about legislating morality? You can't legislate morality. Well, what else do you legislate? Everything from the speed limit to murder laws is someone's concept of the good. King said something like, legislating morality, by laws, I cannot change a man's heart, but I can change his behavior and keep him from lynching me, and that's a good thing too. There are common goods that we can do without mixing Christianity in a political party. So I'm not talking about taking over a political party or taking over a university or becoming Chop and Chaz and taking over blocks and city blocks and things like that, burning down a police station. No, we're Christians. I want to say we want to be salt and light in the institutions that matter and that are influential. We once were. We're now irrelevant and we're pushed on the outside. We need to have an intellectual voice of Christ in these major institutions, and whatever ones give us the best possible way in, let's move through that. All right. I think we're done. Eric, you want to finish up, or Dawn? Okay.
All right. Wonderful. I do want to remind everyone that we're going to break now, and